Hi everyone, and welcome to Exploring the Build. If you just found this place, then welcome. And if you're returning, I'm glad to have you back. I'm Alex, and this is my channel where we explore and theory craft different character builds for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Today, we're continuing our Jaws of the Lion character builds, where we're taking the character classes from Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion and recreating them in Dungeons & Dragons. Now, because Jaws of the Lion is a small standalone game or expansion for the Gloomhaven series, that's meant to be more of an introduction into the Gloomhaven series, I'm considering this a mini-series that is meant to keep up with that introduction type theme. I am only going to level 10 for the breakdown of these builds, and in the final summary I'll talk about what the full 20 levels could look like, but I'm only covering the first 10 in the level by level section. I'm hoping that this will make the character build more digestible and allow me to spend more time on things like the background of Gloomhaven, why we're making the choices in D&D that we are to reflect Gloomhaven, and hopefully to inform a little bit as to how to build a character in D&D around a specific concept. Speaking of concept, for today's build, we are going to be creating the Hatchet. The Hatchet is a medium health pool ranged character and is really meant to be the damage dealer of the 4 Jaws of the Lion characters. All we're really worried about today is getting that range damage, but with a specific type of weapon. See, the Hatchet is a very thematic character in that they throw hatchets, and that's it. No other weapons. So for us, that is going to be the main challenge of our build in D&D. We're going to want to build a strength-based range character that throws, specifically, hatchets to deal as much damage as possible. They do also have a fair bit of access to the wound condition and a couple other conditions from Gloomhaven. However, the wound condition is not an easy condition to mimic outside of spells or alchemist fire. I talked about why this is in our Scoundrel character build, but I'll also briefly mention it later in the build here as well. Final thing, just like our other Jaws of the Lion character builds, at level 5 in Gloomhaven, character unlocks something special that is probably considered spoilers for the most part for the game. So here's an early spoiler warning, and I'll mention it later on in the build when it shows up as well if you don't actually want spoilers for what could be unlocked in Jaws of the Lion. Before we actually start the build though, let's look at their flavor text. While any normal Inox may be valued in Gloomhaven for their brute strength and endurance with manual labor, if you want to be a successful mercenary in the city, sometimes a little more finesse is required. Hatchets have fully embraced life in the city, outfitting themselves with the latest fashions. It is all a bit of a front, though, as their true passion lies in their arsenal. No one is a better marksman with a throwing axe, and if anybody wants to challenge that claim, they had better be prepared for a duel to the death. Starting at character creation with our lineage, we are an Inox, which, like our Brute and Lightning Bolts class from the Gloomhaven series, are both going to be a custom lineage since there's no real D&D support for that. With custom lineage though, we're going to gain a +2 to a stat of our choice, we're going to gain a free feat, and we can also choose to gain either Dark Vision or a skill. As usual, I'm going to go with Dark Vision here. For our free feat, we're going to gain the Slasher feat. Slasher gives us a +1 to strength or dexterity, and a bonus on both of our critical hits and normal hits, once per turn, that deal slashing damage. This will be important for mimicking some of those Gloomhaven conditions. When we hit a creature with a normal attack, once per turn, we can reduce their speed by 10 feet. That's kind of an immobilize feature, or at least as close as we're going to get to it, given that we're not picking up any other abilities that are better mimics of that. For our stats, we're going to put the +2 from Custom Lineage into our Strength, along with 9 points from Point Buy. We are then taking the extra +1 from the Slasher feat. For our background, the Hatchet is a bit of a wanderer, so any background that fits that kind of theme will work for us. They are also a bit of a showman, so if you wanted something like Entertainer, that could probably be pretty fitting for us, covering both the wanderer aspect and the showmanship aspect. For our stats, we are putting the +2 from Custom Lineage into our Strength, along with 9 points from Point Buy. We're then taking the extra +1 from the Slasher feat and putting that into Strength as well. That gives us a grand total of 18 for our starting Strength. We'll then put 7 points into our Dexterity and Constitution to give us 14 each of those. And we're going to put 4 points into Intelligence to give us a 12 overall for that. And Wisdom and Charisma are both going to be staying at 8 since we have no more points to spend on our ability scores. Starting the actual level breakdown of the build now. At level 1, we are a fighter. We're going to gain thrown weapon fighting as well as second wind. Second Wind is just a self-heal that uses a bonus action, and when we do it, we gain a d10 plus fighter level hit points back, and that scales really well. Thrown Weapon Fighting is our fighting style, and I didn't really lay out any choice because that's the fighting style that we want. We don't have a way to actually get our hatchets back, so we're going to have to invest in a bunch of hand axes and then just throw them as much as possible. Thrown Weapon Fighting lets us seamlessly pull out an axe and throw it without actually having to have it ready beforehand, and it gives us an extra +2 bonus to the damage we deal when we throw an actual thrown weapon. At level 2, we are Fighter 2, and here we just gain Action Surge. We can now make an additional attack or use our Action Surge to do a different additional action. But assuming it's 2 attacks, that means we can now throw 2 weapons in one turn, hopefully dealing a little bit more damage in a very clutch situation for us. Level 3, we are a Fighter 3, and that lets us pick our Fighter subclass. For us, we're going to want to be a Battle Master of all things. Battle Master has a couple few features, but the main thing we want it for are the Battle Master maneuvers and the superiority die to use those maneuvers with. For the maneuvers, you can kind of pick your favorites, though I will say the one we absolutely want is the Quick Toss ability. Quick Toss lets us just as a bonus action pick up a weapon that has the thrown property and throw it as an attack. Then if that attack hits, it deals the weapon's damage plus the superiority die of damage as well. That means in any one given round, we could use Action Surge and Quick Toss for 3 attacks with our hatchets. We just need to have 3 hatchets to be able to do so. Other maneuvers that I would also suggest would be Sweeping Attack, actually, since that's a melee-based kind of cleave effect, which the hatchet does have access to a melee AoE sort of cleave attack, and that would at least give us something to do if we were ever faced with melee combat, especially against 2 or more enemies. And then for the last maneuver that we would want, I would suggest Ambush. It gives us a bonus to our stealth rolls if we want to use that, or it gives us a bonus to our initiative, both of which are equal to a roll of the superiority die. Either one could be very helpful for getting into the start of a fight. Level 4, we're a Fighter 4, and here we gain an ability score improvement or feat. We're actually going to take an ability score improvement to Intelligence and improve that Intelligence by +2. Or if you wanted to, get a half feat and improve Intelligence by +1. There's a multi-classing reason for why we're doing this now, and it's not really optimal for our damage per se, but we still want to do this now for later down the line. At level 5, we are Fighter 5, and we gain extra attack. We now have a lot of attacks, with potentially anywhere from between 2 to potentially 5 attacks in any one given turn. However, we also have to use a lot of hatchets to be able to get those attacks to actually proc. Even though we've got extra attack at this level, our next couple levels are going to be dedicated to making sure that we don't run out of hatchets. At level 6, we are jumping over to Artificer. Artificer is why we took the Intelligence in the first place. The Artificer right away, all we get is Magical Tinkering and Spellcasting, and those aren't too important, though we can save that Spellcasting for more out-of-combat utility spells since we're not really worried about those in combat. Though I will say, the actual one spell that we might want to look at is Tasha's Caustic Brew. Tasha's Caustic Brew is a way to deal damage over time to an enemy, or at least when they start their turn. If they failed their save, they might have taken damage from the spell originally, and then at the start of their turn they'll take more damage. And that is literally the Gloomhaven Wound effect. It's really hard to pull off again outside of spells like Tasha's Caustic Brew or Alchemist Fire. And Alchemist Fire isn't really good to use unless your DM was very generous. If they are, then feel free to pick up Alchemist Fire as soon as we get the Quick Toss ability, and just go to town throwing either Hatchets or Alchemist Fire to get a little bit of Gloomhaven Wound, or damage over time, stacked onto your enemies. If your DM isn't generous, though, and they're going to do rules by the book and rules as read, then Alchemist Fire is really rather bad, and Tasha's Caustic Brew is going to be the better way of picking up a wound-type effect for our character. At level 7, we are now an Artificer 2, and here we gain the ability Infused Item. We know 4 infusions, and we can make 2 of them at any given time. Here is where the mini spoiler shows up. If you don't want any spoilers for what the hatchet does eventually unlock, feel free to skip ahead and maybe skip the summary, because I'm going to talk about it there as well. But if you're okay with the spoilers, feel free to keep watching. I'll do a quick second pause, but after that we're getting right into what feature we're getting and why it's going to be a spoiler. Okay, so now that that's out of the way, what do we actually get? Well, here, one of the infused items is going to be Returning Weapon. And that itself is not really a spoiler, because that gives us our favorite. And the Hatchet right away has a favorite hatchet that they deal extra damage with when they throw it. For us, it's a +1 weapon, so it's a little bit of extra damage, but it also comes right back to us without us having to go and retrieve it, which is really why it's our favorite. From now on, we don't even need any other hatchets, we just need one. And we can make as many attacks with that hatchet as we want, since every time we do, it's going to come right back. The reason this is a spoiler is because at level 5, the Hatchet character actually gets an upgrade to this Hatchet card. And that's not really possible to mimic for us, unless you can find a magic item in D&D that mimics that upgraded Hatchet, or unless your DM is generous enough to just build one for you, or maybe you work with your DM to build it yourself, since you're an artificer. Yes, they get a little miniature of a hatchet that is their favorite hatchet to use, and they just get to go to town dealing a bunch of damage against enemies when they use that specific weapon. For us, the trade-off of not being able to upgrade it, again unless you find a way to do so, is that it always returns to us, so we can always use it, whereas the hatchet in Gloomhaven has to go and retrieve their favorite. At level 8, we're going to bounce back to Fighter 6 and pick up another ability score improvement / feat. We were actually kind of fine to gain the intelligence needed to multiclass into Artificer, because fighters gain so many ability score improvements / feats. And we're done with Artificer levels now. There's no subclass that's really what we want for our Hatchet character, and there are no other abilities or even more spellcasting that we want either. So we're just sticking with Fighter. And it's at this point that we improve our strength by +2 to put it to a total of 20. That means our strength is now capped, and any other ability score improvements or feats that we get can be spent in any way we choose. At level 9, we're a Fighter 7, and here we gain the Battlemaster feature, Know Your Enemy. That just says that if we spend a minute outside combat studying a creature or interacting with it, we can learn 2 pieces from a specific list of information about that character. It's meta information, so it's a nice way to actually gauge what an enemy is capable of. It's not too Gloomhaven oriented, but for what it's worth, we do gain an extra superiority die, as well as 2 additional maneuvers, which can be anything that we want at this point. Finally, at level 10, we are Fighter 8, and this gives us our last ability score improvement / feat that I'm at least going to talk to for the breakdown of this build. I would suggest either Alert or Medium Armor Master. Alert gives us a really good bonus to initiative, and that's always just nice to have. Our last feat would be Medium Armor Master. Medium Armor Master would give us a little bit more of a bonus to our AC if we increase our dexterity, and it removes the disadvantage on stealth from all sets of medium armor, meaning we could go up to get half plate, improve our dexterity to 16 eventually, and just have a really powerful defense that also can benefit from stealth very well. Honestly, anything else you can think of would also be good. Since we already capped our strength at 20, we're pretty spoiled for choice. I will also say we don't really want to increase our constitution, because, like I said in character creation, the Hatchet is a medium character. They're not meant to have a lot of hit points, just a middle of the road where they get 1 at one level, 2 at the next, 1, 2, that sort of repetition. And a 14 constitution plus being a fighter actually gives us that middle of the road health pool. Alright, it's time to summarize our build. Well, we certainly are the Hatchet. We have range damage, we have hand axes, we can throw a whole bunch of them, and we have bonuses to the throwing of those hand axes as well. There's not much more we could ask for. We even have a couple of mimics for the Gloomhaven conditions that we would normally have access to, like Immobilize, Disarm, and even Wound, assuming that we at least have Tasha's Caustic Brew, or potentially just Alchemist Fire, if your DM's nice. Again, mini spoiler warning for anyone that it applies to, but we also have our favorite and the upgrade 4, and that's exactly what the Hatchet wants. They want not just a bunch of hatchets to dish out a lot of damage, but they want their favorite one to be able to really sink in the damage to their enemies. Overall, the Hatchet is probably one of the simplest characters in the entire Gloomhaven series, and it's really one of the simplest builds. We just pick up hand axes and we throw them. That's it. Technically, we should have access to the wind type element from Gloomhaven, but besides our little bit of Artificer spellcasting, there's not much that really gives us that. I'll leave it as a regret that we didn't get to pick up more of the wind element. But like I said, the best bonuses to our actual damage and mechanical playstyle of just throwing hand axes are going to be from being a fighter and having our artificer infused items. I should point out as well that besides the actual ranged abilities, we can mix it up in melee. Hand axes are still melee weapons. Most of our maneuvers that we pick, besides I suppose quick toss, could probably work in melee as well, assuming we pick up ones that can work in melee. And we're still just a Battlemaster fighter, meaning we have just as many attacks inside melee combat as outside, given that we could pick up a hand axe in our offhand and just swing that as well. Eventually, if we were going to go to full level 20, like I said during the build, we'd just be a fighter, and that could allow us to pick up other feats. Fighting Initiate, that gives us an extra fighting style, that would allow us to get 2-weapon fighting. So every time we engage in the 2-weapon fighting bonus action, we'd gain our strength modifier to that attack's damage. That's a long-winded way of saying we can do whatever we want. We're really good at thrown weapons in ranged combat, and that's what we want to do. But if we need to go melee, we can. Other than that, let me know what you thought of the build or what you would do to get closer to the Jaws of the Lion character class. Thank you so much for coming on the journey with me, and I hope to see you in the next one.